You're right. It still carries a certain stiffness. Let's try to infuse it with more raw humanity, more of the messy, contradictory nature of real emotion. Here's another attempt, focusing on a more visceral and creative approach. The moment fractured time. 1 second. The clink of our familiar silverware against the chipped edges of our dinner plates. The next, a chasm yawning open beneath my feet, the mundane suddenly monstrous. We should try an open marriage. The words weren't shouted, weren't even particularly loud. They were dropped into the quiet like a stone into a still pond, the ripples spreading outwards, threatening to drown everything I thought I knew. Was she joking? The thought was a frantic little bird trapped in my chest, beating its wings against the cage of dawning dread. But her eyes, those eyes I'd once believed held the map to my soul, were glacial. No humor, no hint of the woman who used to laugh until tears streamed down her face at my terrible puns. Just a cold, assessing gaze. It could be good for us, she added, the clinical detachment in her voice a scalpel slicing through the last vestiges of my denial. That's when the bird in my chest died. This wasn't a suggestion, it was an eviction notice. And the worst part? This was just the first tremor. That night, sleep was a battlefield where my thoughts wrestled with the impossible. The ceiling, usually a comforting blankness, became a screen projecting memories. Our first awkward date, the hesitant, "I love you." The promises whispered in the dark. Had they all been elaborate performances? 6 years. A lifetime, or so I believed. Now, those years felt like sand slipping through my fingers, leaving nothing but a gritty residue of betrayal. How could she utter those words with such casual cruelty, as if discussing a home renovation? The morning light was a thief, stealing the last remnants of my fragile hope. Lauren lay beside me, a landscape I no longer recognized. The warmth that used to emanate from her was gone, replaced by a chilling stillness. She was a stranger wearing the familiar mask of my wife. I dragged myself out of bed, my limbs heavy with a leaden despair. In the kitchen, she sat hunched over her phone, the blue light reflecting in her vacant eyes. Coffee steamed in her mug, a ritual we'd once shared, now a solitary act. Usually, she'd offer a sleepy smile, a mumbled morning. Today, she didn't even register my presence. I sat down, the silence thick enough to choke on. Was I already erased? Morning, I croaked, the words sounding hollow, a ghost of its former self. She sipped her coffee, her thumb scrolling relentlessly across the screen, her gaze fixed on that digital world that now seemed to hold more allure than me. Not a word. Something vital within me, a fragile connection I hadn't even realized was still clinging on, finally snapped. Work was a blur of forced smiles and robotic responses. My phone vibrated with phantom notifications, each silent but a fresh wave of nausea. Maybe she'd text. Maybe this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Maybe she'd finally acknowledged the bomb she'd dropped into our lives. But the screen remained stubbornly dark, a mirror reflecting my own growing emptiness. I was no longer a priority, not even a blip on her radar. Dinner was a grotesque pantomime. We sat opposite each other, the table a barren wasteland between us. The easy banter, the shared laughter, relics of a bygone era. A wall, built of indifference and unspoken resentments, had sprung up overnight. My attempts at conversation withered and died under the weight of her monosyllabic replies. Good. Fine. She wasn't just ignoring me. She was actively dismantling the very foundation of our shared existence. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing erosion of my sanity. Our home, once a haven, now felt haunted by her absence, even when she was physically present. New clothes appeared in her closet, smelling of unfamiliar perfumes. She spent hours in the bathroom, emerging with a subtly altered appearance, a stranger in my own home. Evenings became her escape, the click of the door as she left a constant reminder of my isolation. Out with friends, she'd say, her voice laced with impatience, her eyes daring me to question her. Some nights, she didn't come home at all, the empty space beside me in the bed a cold testament to her indifference. I'd lie awake, listening for the faint click of the lock, the soft rustle of her clothes as she finally slipped in at dawn, heading straight for the shower to wash away the remnants of her other life. Her phone was her constant companion, its screen glowing with secrets, her lips occasionally curving into a small, private smile. What was making her so happy? If it wasn't me, then who? The night I finally shattered. The air in the hallway felt thick with unspoken accusations. The smug set of her jaw, the faint, lingering scent of another man. It was a physical blow. I stood in the doorway, a desperate plea rising in my throat. We need to talk. She looked up, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features. No, we don't, she said, her voice flat, dismissive, as she brushed past me, heading towards the sanctuary of our bedroom, a room that now felt irrevocably tainted. That night, the final tendrils of hope snapped. This wasn't just a shift, it was a complete severing. She didn't even bother with the pretense anymore. Late-night notifications, the hurried silencing of her phone before she left, the way she looked right through me as if I were a ghost. I was nothing more than a shadow in her periphery. Then came the quiet devastation of Caleb. He shuffled into the kitchen one evening, his small face etched with a confusion that mirrored my own. He sat at the table, pushing his peas around with his fork, his gaze fixed on the empty chair where his mother used to sit. "Dad," he asked, his voice small and uncertain, "why doesn't Lauren eat with us anymore?" The question was a punch to the gut, stealing the air from my lungs. How could I explain this to him? The truth, that the woman he loved, the woman he called Mom, had simply checked out. I forced a smile, the muscles in my face aching with the effort. I ruffled his hair. "She's just busy, buddy." He nodded, but the knowing in his eyes, the unspoken understanding of a child's keen intuition, broke my heart. That night, the house breathed with a heavy silence. Anger simmered beneath the surface of my despair, a toxic brew of betrayal and injustice. I had given her my life, and in return, I had become invisible. At 2 a.m., a soft giggle, like a secret shared in the darkness, pierced the quiet. I turned to see Lauren, her face illuminated by the cold glow of her phone, a stranger bathed in the digital light. In that moment, clarity arrived, sharp and brutal. The war was already lost. She was finding joy while I was drowning in sorrow. She was lost in the ephemeral world of her messages while I carried the crushing weight of a love that had become a solitary burden. But I was finished. Dawn painted the sky in hues of gray and reluctant pink. While she still slept, lost in her detached world, I rose. Today, the narrative of my life would finally shift. First, the evidence. Her carelessly discarded phone, the blatant messages, a digital breadcrumb trail leading to the truth. Then, the lawyer. This had to end, not with a whimper, but with a decisive severing. That evening, as I sat in the kitchen, the silence thick with unspoken words, Lauren walked in. She placed her phone on the table, the small thud echoing the finality of my decision, and reached for her coffee. I looked at her, this woman who had once been the center of my universe, now a distant, almost abstract figure. And all I felt was a cold, hollow indifference, tinged with the bitter aftertaste of what we had lost. She has no idea, I thought, that she's already gone. The next morning, the sunlight touched her face as she slept, a face that now held no power over me. She didn't care. I was no longer the sun in her sky. But today, the orbit would change. Quietly, I placed the envelope beside her coffee cup. Inside, the stark reality of divorce papers and a single, carefully folded note. "I hope you find the freedom you wanted." No arguments, no explanations, no desperate last words. It was done. As I picked up my suitcase, the weight felt surprisingly light. Stepping out the door felt like shedding a skin I hadn't realized I was wearing. Freedom, raw and untainted, washed over me. Caleb was waiting in the back seat, his small hand clutching a worn teddy bear. For him too, a new beginning. Lauren had never truly fought for him, had always been a peripheral figure. I didn't look back. Days blurred into weeks, marked by her silence. No calls, no messages. She truly didn't care. Then, one day, the familiar ring of my phone shattered the quiet. Her name flashed across the screen. Lauren. My breath caught in my throat. What now? I hesitated, then answered. George. Her voice, usually so self-assured, held a tremor, a vulnerability I'd never witnessed. For the first time, she sounded genuinely lost. I'm so sorry. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of unspoken regrets. I was selfish. I always thought you'd be there. I never thought you'd actually leave. Inside me, There was only a vast emptiness. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering ache. Just a quiet, resolute nothingness. I took a deep breath. "Lauren," I asked, my voice flat and devoid of emotion, "do you miss me? Or do you miss the man who loved you no matter what?" The silence stretched, thick with the truth we both knew. "Finally," I said, "Lauren, I hope one day you truly understand what you've lost. But it doesn't matter to me anymore." And I hung up. In that moment, for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in what felt like forever. Not happiness, not yet, but a stark, undeniable freedom. A freedom born from the ashes of a love that had turned to dust.